May I please have your full and undivided attention? It is time for the Paranormal Rundown. Hello, this is Cedric Danquil Smythe. I'd like to welcome all fans of the paranormal, the unusual, the slightly off-kilter, the frightening, the terrifying, the horrifying, and simply the occasionally entertaining. This is the Paranormal Rundown. There's no place else like it. Regardless of our gargantuan efforts, we were unable to find a guest for this week's episode. I suppose the torture implements were simply too much for their sensibilities. So instead we'll have Vic Hermanson, JJ Johnson, Dave Griffith, discussing random topics from a list of over 2,370 paranormal pieces of information. Like I say, you'll love it. Tonight they're talking about Bob Lazar, the names of the various enemies of God, Zoroastrianism and their very particular burial practices, which just happens to include vultures, as well as the elevator game. So get ready. We have more than 2 hours of Paranormal Rundown awaiting you. Let's go.
Hello, everybody. This is Vic Hermanson. I'm one of the 4 permanent hosts of the Paranormal Rundown, which is where you have found yourself right now. The other 3 hosts are JJ Johnson, Dave Griffith, and Father Michael Birdsong. Unfortunately, Father Michael Birdsong is not able to be with us tonight because of health issues, and we are hoping that he gets better fast and that he returns to the rundown as quickly as possible. This is the 17th Paranormal Rundown. I'm still kind of amazed that we've gotten to 17 Paranormal Rundowns. And we now have in our list of topics to randomly choose from 2,350 paranormal and paranormal adjacent, I guess you might say, topics. That's a bunch of topics. The way the show works is we spin a random number generator. It comes up with 6 topics. And then among us, we choose from those 6 topics. If there's something that somebody particularly loves, they can just grab on it and say, we're talking about topic number 3. If there's something they hate, they can say, we're not talking about that. If they don't like any of the topics, then we simply cheat and roll again. If somebody has something they just have to talk about that's not even among the topics, we say, oh, fine, go for it. But we try to use the rundown list as a way of generating a starting point and ideas. And it has become very, very deep in terms of the information that it contains. So, welcome, Dave. Welcome, JJ.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Let's get rolling.
All right, let's get rolling. Hitting F9. Running. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Our 6 topics that we first came up with are immediate dismissal versus willingness to examine. Topic 2, Bob Lazar. Topic 3, Maslow, peak experiences. Topic 4, can true machine sentience ever occur? For that matter, are humans truly sentient? Topic 5, Orientalism. And topic 6, the Cecil Hotel.
Rough start.
We haven't. Oh, I don't know. There's a couple gems in there.
Yeah?
You know, we haven't had a good UFO discussion.
We have not had a good UFO discussion. And I think Bob Lazar is a pretty decent place to start for that.
It really is. You know much about Bob, JJ?
No, I do not.
Okay. Well,
Well, tell you what. Go ahead. You go ahead, Dave.
Well, I was going to just give JJ some of the background, and then we'll see what comes out of it. And I'm totally going to butcher this, so I'm not by any means a Bob Lazar, scholar. But I've listened to a bunch of stuff and done a little bit of research on the web, so I guess I'm close enough for what we've got. So he supposedly went to, Vic, you're gonna have to correct me right off the bat. Was it MIT?
Well, I can do the whole story if you'd like.
Yeah, do the whole story, because I know parts of it, but I really don't want to get it wrong.
Okay.
And I love the story.
Do you know who George Knapp is?
Yes.
Okay, George Knapp was an occasional replacement host for Art Bell.
Oh,
and
he's the person who has absolutely led Coast to Coast AM into its conspiracy theory nightmare state that it currently lives in.
Is it really?
George Knapp?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Coast to Coast AM in its current incarnation is probably the worst thing that has ever graced my eardrums in my entire life.
JJ, I like how.
Tell us how you really.
I like how moderate you are on your opinions.
I try,
well, okay. Let's take a side trip. I haven't heard it in its current form. So, what did they do? What's it concentrating on? What's the problem that they have?
Oh, everything from flat Earth to the Nephilim, or the true entities that, in fact, they had one guest on last year before, I don't quite remember, in which he combined the absolute worst of Hollow Earth theory with the Nephilim are the true rulers of this world, all in one spectacular piece of bullshit. And I was amazed. I was so amazed, I was horrified and immediately stopped.
Okay, I think you've got your Georges mixed up. I think the George you're thinking of is George Norrie.
Yes, I am sorry.
And George Norrie is, well, I mean, I don't want to get sued, but yeah, he's an idiot. He did some interesting, kind of innovative things when he first took over for Art Bell. And then I guess they've seen that their demographic maybe wants to hear all the conspiracy theory crap. But the guy I'm talking about is George Knapp. And George Knapp is a legitimate journalist. He's a newscaster out of Las Vegas. And his career took a big change when he started reporting on a guy named Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar claimed that he had been hired to work at Area 51 and that his job was to reverse engineer alien technology that they had there on the base. He indicated that there were, I don't know, more than one. I'm thinking like 4 or 5 different craft that had been recovered over the years. He indicated that there were, at least at one time, living, what do they call them? EBEs, extraterrestrial biological entities. There at the base. And that the craft that they were working with were powered by element 115, which at the time was kind of just a theoretical thing. See, this is a while back now. Dave,
this is way back.
Yeah, this is a while back. We're talking what, around late 80s, I think.
Yeah, I think he came forward in like 89.
Yeah,
or something.
Late 80s or something.
But early 80s is when he started working there.
Right, when he was doing the actual work out there, or claims to have been doing the actual work out there at the base. Personally, I believe there are large chunks of truth in what he's saying. I'm a Bob Lazar supporter.
I am as well.
Yeah, I'm a Bob Lazar believer.
if anything, simply because of the erasing of his history.
Yes, there have. So Bob Lazar is a legitimate scientific mind. Part of what he claims is that he went to MIT to study particular things. He went to some other universities, and those records seem to be gone. Now, the reason he says they're gone is because, look, he didn't go there to get a full degree. He went there to learn, let's say, about manipulation of radioactive elements, because that's what they needed him to do. And after he learned about that, he came back and worked at Area 51.
Well,
his story.
First,
go ahead.
Before Area 51, he worked at Los Alamos, right?
Yes, that's right.
And so there are people who knew him at Los Alamos, but his work record at Los Alamos is gone.
Except
So
for
not only have they eliminated his school credentials and history, but they have eliminated his pre-Area 51 work record, where he would have been able to be spotted as someone who would be useful to that project.
Correct. Except for a couple of people there at Los Alamos, had taken home their little internally created phone book.
The directory.
Yeah, the directory of, hey, what's JJ's number? Oh, 666. Boom, boom, boom.
How did you know?
Anyway, they kept their little phone books, and he's in those little phone books. Robert Lazar, and gives his job title and all of that. So I have all kinds of thoughts about what he might be, but he's clearly somebody who knows his science. He runs a company now that sells difficult to obtain materials to scientists. He has a jet car, lots of jet cars. He has the Bob Lazar Desert Jet Car Festival every year. He was one of the first private owners of a supercomputer. He is a very, very interesting guy. And look, I'm not perfect, but I'm really, really good at reading tiny micro expressions, which I think is probably why JJ frequently has his head down, so that I can't.
Oh, I don't care if you can tell if I'm lying or not.
It's his face. But I have never seen anything in his demeanor, in his voice patterns, in his body patterns that makes me think he's lying. He's never went out to try to get money out of all this. He's never seemed to want fame, and his story has never deviated any.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is he's had interviews, but not like all over the place. And, he's never turned around and tried to sell books and diagrams of ships or anything he could to pad his pocket out of this. He just wanted to tell his story. And then pretty much since then, to be left alone.
Yeah, I think he's essentially, since this started, said that, look, my life would have been a whole lot better had I never been an employee of Area 51. But he said, I'll fall off here in a second, but he said some things that were really interesting. He talked about how these craft fly. Okay, so we've got the craft he talks about the most was called he called it the sport model. And it looks like a standard flying saucer. A disc shape, a little bump in the middle, a little bump on the bottom. And he did create diagrams about what those bumps do. And he said that when it flies, it's not flying along like a saucer that you've thrown or a frisbee. It turns on its side. and it's flying through the air sideways, vertically. And, there have been all kinds of new, what do they call them now? UAP, unexplained aerial phenomenon, or UFOs recently.
Right.
And there have been some fantastic ones coming out of Colombia where you're seeing, so it's a private plane. It's flying a former model who's now a member of the Colombian parliament. And you see in the background this little black dot show up, and a very, very clear UAP flying in front of the plane comes within, I don't know, it feels like 50 feet of the plane, going really, really fast, same shape, flying on its side. Exactly like Bob Lazar. And there have been a number of these reports where they see these craft flying sideways,
including one from our own government.
Mm-hmm.
Right. One of the ones that was released a few years back turned on its side and went
right,
up and down.
And this is how Bob Lazar said that he, these things fly. Now, some people say, he says that these craft are powered by element 115, which at one time was called Un Pentium. Ooh. Un Pentium. Now it's called Moscovium. And as far as we know, as far as Earth technology goes, it's a synthetic element that can be made in tiny, tiny portions and disintegrates immediately.
Well, and at the time he's told his story, there was no 115.
Right.
Nobody believed that it even existed. And it wasn't until, I don't remember when, but, 10, 15 years ago or whatever, maybe longer, but they finally actually created it.
Right.
And it does. It has an extremely short lifespan.
Right. Half-life in the seconds, but at least for the isotopes that we're able to create.
2003. That was when it was first synthesized.
First synthesized. There was some talk about maybe one of the reasons that he got in trouble was he stole some 115. He became very familiar with the flight patterns of these craft out of Area 51. And so maybe not the smartest thing in the world, but he took a lot of his buddies out there to, hey, get out there at 6:30 p.m. and you'll get to see the fireworks. You'll get to see the show. And they did. So Bob Lazar to me is so interesting because of the consistency of his story, because he really has pissed off some people. Look, if you're somebody out there just spouting crap, the government really doesn't care about you. They really don't. I could go out there and talk about the fact that I had been abducted, and I could describe the craft. Nobody would pay attention to me at all. But they do pay attention to Bob Lazar, which makes me think that at least somebody thinks he might have something to say that they really wouldn't want to have revealed. And it just always has had this sort of X-Files feel to it. Remember how Mulder would occasionally get a phone call? Fox Mulder. Yes, who's this? I just want you to know you have a friend within the FBI. And
Right.
It's always had that kind of feel to it. And I guess that's the Vic Hermanson relation or rendition of the Bob Lazar story.
Yeah, it was pretty good. Covered much more than I would have.
There's more in there, but I can't dredge it up immediately.
Yeah, the bottom line was he was a guy who seemed to know the science that other scientists looked at what he said and went, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. And was completely disregarded and attempted to be made, as a quack, and has taken a pounding over the years. And now the stuff that's coming out seems to bear out more of his story. And it's been interesting.
There's nobody else really who's just like him out there in that community, which surprises me a little bit. It seems to me like there would have been some other people coming forward and saying, yeah, it was my job to figure out the fuel system or something like that. But JJ, any thoughts about Mr. Lazar now that you've had the world's best education concerning him?
It sounds extremely intriguing. I'll have to go and look some of this up for myself. I've heard a few snippets of what y'all were talking about, but never the full picture like that.
There's a good interview Joe Rogan did with Lazar and Jeremy Corbell.
Yep, I'm out. No, thank you. Rogan is trash.
Well, wait a minute. Who's trash, Corbell or Rogan?
Rogan.
Why do you say that?
I have never heard anything remotely interesting ever come out of that man's mouth. And I find his entire, this is probably sacrilege to other podcasters, but I find his entire show reprehensible and repulsive.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
What is so? Okay, let's do a score sheet where JJ Rogan is in the reprehensible and repulsive category. What about you, Dave?
Oh no, I love Rogan. Okay. Now there are shows that Rogan does that I think are over the top and not interesting. But some of the most interesting paranormal and unusual topics that I have heard deep dives on, I've heard on the Rogan show.
Fair enough. I'm somewhere in the middle. I got really, really irritated early on with all the weed smoking.
Right.
Really, really pissed me off. It seems like he stopped that now.
Oh, yeah. He does that now as an occasional thing, but not on the interviews that I find interesting.
Right. I have noticed that he has the ability to get some really, really high-powered guests on there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he can get Michio Kaku. He can get Brian Cox. He can get very, very high-level people to come and talk on his show.
And Snowden on there.
Well, and the thing is, when you have Brian Cox or Michio Kaku, you don't personally have to be very interesting. You just have to ask a question that can get the ball rolling. And so anyway,
I think some of the more interesting ones have been like the Bob Lazar, like Graham Hancock, the guys with the ancient archaeology stuff.
Who was the other person you talked about? Corbell?
Yeah, Jeremy Corbell has been heavily involved in the UFO stuff. I think he worked with Knapp. That's how he got involved. And he has done but he's a documentary guy, right? So he's done a lot of the stuff with the current ideas around disclosure.
Okay.
And so he's a, I don't know if he's considered a journalist, but documentary filmmaker.
Okay, so Lazar exists. Some people believe he's a total complete fake, which it's very hard for me to see how you take that position. You certainly can't take the position that he doesn't know the science, or at least he doesn't know mainstream science, because he does. There are a lot of people who just think he's part of the noise and the detritus of the UFO community. And then there are people who are very, very passionate supporters of him. I'm not up to the passionate supporter level, but I'm in the category of, I think there's a lot of what he says is probably true.
I will say this. Academia has a really horrible habit of self-regulating itself to the point of the nonsensical, where if anything is not conventional, then they will immediately roll it out and then attempt to discredit anyone who talks about things that are outside of their considered wheelhouse. And any discussion about the validity of extraterrestrial life or studying things along that nature has been, people have been immediately discredited for even entertaining that idea, which to me is patently ridiculous. And I was watching a talk by a professor, and I don't remember his name. This was probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, where he was saying, look, if we actually had some legitimate scientific inquiry into this, then maybe we would be a little more knowledgeable than what we are now. But instead, because we have turned our back and ridiculed anyone who's even remotely considered this to be a possibility or even just examine the possibility, then we're in the dark. And I completely agree with that.
Well, how many UFO sightings have you had, Dave?
One.
What was the sighting?
That was it was something that was back in 91, maybe, up above Fresno in the mountains. That was the thing that it moved in ways that we didn't have any craft that could move like that and then shot off into space.
But it was a light.
It was a light
that was moving in unconventional ways.
In unconventional ways. It came down and it flew up. I mean, it never got probably closer than that I remember. Like, it couldn't have been more than, it could have been 10, 15 miles from us. I mean, it's not like it came and flew over top of us. Right. We were sitting on the edge of a mountain at night, but we saw this light come down and it went. Now, the buddy that saw it with me, he says that it split into multiple lights.
Which,
and then rejoined together. I don't remember that, but this was a really long time ago. All I remember is it doing stuff that we didn't have anything that could do that. And certainly not at those speeds. Like it would zigzag. I mean, like it would go from one. I mean, when you're above Fresno, you're on the side of a mountain. We're up at like 7,500 feet. Okay. And there's nothing.
A long way at 7,500 feet.
Yeah. And there's nothing between you and the desert floor, right? It's straight down. It's the edge of the Sierra. And so you're looking out over the Central Valley of California. So you can see lights from a long, long freaking way away.
Right. Yeah.
And, all I know is it came in and it zipped from one side of our field of view to another in seconds. It would have crushed anybody human inside of that moving at speeds, that acceleration.
Yeah.
And then when it was done, it's not like it went on its way up the valley. It went up into space, right? It went up.
Right.
And then disappeared.
What about you, JJ?
I've had one.
Okay. Can you tell us about it, please?
Yeah. I think I was in 4th or 5th grade, and I was outside. It was at night, and in our yard we had 2 gigantic oak trees that had to be 150 years old. And there was a craft that flew directly over the oak tree that was by our driveway and hovered there. It had different lights on each one of its sides. I distinctly remember seeing an octagonal shape, and each side had a light that was on it. both my grandmother and I witnessed this.
Excellent.
And then it shot off.
Just came to gaze at you and your grandmother and time to go.
And then sped off.
What he doesn't remember was the 3 hours of time that he lost.
The 3 hours of time.
And he hasn't figured out what that lump is in his shoulder. Lump
under your shoulder.
And my butt was really sore.
Really sore.
Oh, you had to go there.
You had to go there. All right, we'll go there for a second. But do you remember the South Park episode?
Oh, gosh, yes.
Where Cartman was abducted? And
they had several episodes all about that.
Yeah. Well,
they were genius.
Whitley Strieber got really angry about that.
Oh, did he?
Oh, yes, he did. He was. This was back when. I mean, he was really, really angry. All right, I've seen multiple. Partially because I used to spend a lot of time doing astronomy. Looking up at the sky. I had several telescopes, pretty advanced telescopes. But my favorite way of doing astronomy was not to use motors or steppers or anything like that. Just Dobsonian scopes, which is just a big tube with a mirror in it and eyepieces. And you move it around on a Teflon base. So it's very smooth. That's the most fun. It's the astronomy equivalent of a cane pole.
Mm-hmm.
For fishing. And what I would see there in North Carolina would be at least twice, probably 3 times. One was a little uncertain, but you would see these huge triangles, 200 yards on a side, something like that. So large that the way that you see them is because when you've got a 12-inch Dobsonian scope, when you're looking through it and you've got it properly calibrated, and you've got, you're focused on infinity, you're looking at stars. All you see with a star is a tiny pinpoint of light. That's it. I mean, you're not seeing anything except that tiny pinpoint of light, unless you get a star cluster or a galaxy or something. But you would see a triangle of those stars disappear. And then that triangle would move across that star field and you could follow it. So something was in the way.
Is there any way with those to tell distance?
Very, very difficult.
Because it would be hard to say, is that at, 5,000 feet?
Mm-hmm.
And really big or really small, or is it at 50,000 feet and really large?
You gain a certain ability to determine sizes by the fact that you will occasionally see airplanes fly across your field. And if an airplane is up at, say, 36,000 feet cruising altitude, all you're seeing is something that's a bit bigger than what you see with your eye. So if you're doing this wide field astronomy, you're using a low power lens. You're not really trying to do a lot. What you're trying to do is get a lot of light to your eye. You're not trying to get a lot of magnification. So I would say that they were very high, very high in the 50,000 foot range. And in the 50,000 foot range, they were so much bigger than an airplane.
Right.
that you were seeing a meaningful portion of your field occulted by
and no lights, right?
Oh, no lights.
No lights at all on them.
I never saw any lights. Now I've seen photos, especially from Belgium, where they've got lights on them, but I never saw any lights. It was just, here's this huge thing up there that's just moving along slowly and silently. It doesn't seem to be worried about airplanes running into it, which made me think it was really high. Okay, higher than an airplane would normally fly. Yeah, higher than the flight path. And it doesn't care if I know it's there.
Do you remember about what year this was at?
This would have been 2000 to 2006
Okay.
or so.
So not that long ago.
Not that long ago, no. And these were Celestron and Meade telescopes that I was using. Now, another time, and I've also seen lights move in anomalous ways. And in fact, I've seen so many of those that I just finally said, who cares? I can't, there's no knowledge I can get from that light zipping across the sky other than it's there.
But when they're zipping across the sky, they're mainly one direction, right? You're not talking.
Oh no, they'll stop and turn around, and exactly what you're talking about.
Huh.
You know, where it'll be, if you're looking up, and when I was doing this kind of stuff, I'd use binoculars a lot. Binoculars are great. You can see so many stars with binoculars, and I would normally be using these big binoculars, and you would see something. You could see something go. You would see it move through the binocular field. Put the binoculars down, and you could continue to see it, not because it was so much brighter than everything else, but because you could see it move. Mm-hmm. You could see it. You could see its motion. You could see its path, and it was like you just said, a zigzag. You know, zoop, stop, zoop, back the other way, covering 20 degrees of sky,
right?
Maybe 30. I mean, you know how big an area that is.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I mean,
it's massive.
Yeah, I mean, the moon is covering like a quarter of a degree, and so you're
which lines up with the some of the videos. Well, actually, not the video, but the discussion. If you listen to the interviews with David Fravor,
mm-hmm.
right, he was one of the pilots with the whole Tic Tac and the other videos that they've released. He was talking about watching this Tic Tac that was over the ocean. It was circling something. So they think there was actually a craft under the ocean that was right under the surface. And they don't know what it was doing, but it was like zigzagging back and forth over top of this craft that was about the size of an airliner,
mm-hmm.
submarine type or whatever. And then it saw them and it started rising. He started going in a circular descent down to it, and it parried it. It mirrored him coming up. So they were coming towards each other, like in a downward corkscrew and an upward anti-corkscrew, like in the other direction.
A circular game of chicken?
Yeah.
Great.
And so, and then when it reached a certain point, it zipped off. And it was faster than, he's like, it was just gone, right? You could barely track it.
Right.
And it was so fast. And then they get radioed, and they're told that this Tic Tac showed up on radar at their next waypoint where they were supposed to be
mm-hmm.
in their next part of their flight path, which was like 50 miles away or something. This was a massive distance away, and it got there in seconds.
Right. So moving at speeds that no earthly craft can do.
No craft could do.
So we were driving in Kentucky, going to see my sister way out in rural Kentucky. This is where I learned how different my mind works from my family's. I was driving along. Wife is reading over on the other side of the car or snoozing. Boys are in the back playing Pokemon on like Game Boys or whatever they had at the time. And any console that ever existed, they had. So I don't know which one it was, but I see a UFO up above a barn, multiple lights connected together, probably 50 feet across, this kind of thing, some kind of odd geometric thing. And I go, hey, all of you, wake up. Look up there. Guys, boys, look. What is that? Oh, yeah, that's a UFO, Dad.
Every time you tell this story, I just can't imagine what was running through your head when you went, huh?
It was like, sorry, got to get me a Pikachu or whatever. But
I mean, especially for kids, of all the things to not be excited about.
I know.
Yeah,
Right.
if I would have seen that, you couldn't have torn my eyes away with anything.
Of course not. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you would have been, and I said, do you want me to stop the car so we can get out and look at it? No, let's just keep going.
Well, that's because that craft had an SCP drive
Right.
built
It did.
into it.
Yes, it did. You're right.
Right.
All right. And then I'll make it quick. The sighting I had was at a baseball game where I find myself out in the middle of the field, probably after being abducted, looking up at the sky, realizing that there's something wrong in my current way of perceiving the world. It's like I was in some kind of trance or something. And I can remember it's the same exact feeling I had one time when I passed out from hypotension. I felt like I was underwater and I was trying to get up out of that water. My brain was creating metaphors for what was going on. And finally, it's like, snap out of it, look up. And this time there was serious structure, full daylight. And you can probably find this on MUFON because I did report it. I called it the Sky Train. And that's what it looked like. It looked like multiple craft connected to each other or flying very close to each other. Seems like there was like sort of a kind of sound that it was making. And it just went across the sky and it was not hauling ass. It was going relatively slow.
And nobody else observing
And
it at all.
nobody else saw it.
The first time you told that story, I had chills go down my spine because if there is literally something that could mess with your perception of reality
Yes.
like that, dear goodness gracious.
Well, that's a very scary thought, though, that there's some way that this thing can look. As far as I know, we don't have any weapons, that could be aimed at you or me or Dave that would take over our minds for a period of time. Now, I'm sure that some of the guys who talked to George Norrie would say that, of course they have those kind of weapons, but I've never seen them. And I can't
we have the brown note. No, I'm joking.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm sorry. I feel like an idiot. What is
the theoretical low octave that if you hear it, you poop yourself?
Yeah, that's right. What is it, like 17 hertz or something? Or
something like that.
Yeah, the brown note. That's not on the rundown. I gotta add that to the topics. But anyway,
ladies and gentlemen, 2,351.
Anyway, once again, it comes down to a final opinion. And my opinion is, well, it's not an opinion that I know there are unidentified things flying around up there. I know there are. I've seen them. Dave's seen them. JJ's seen them.
Let's take this back to something that JJ was saying. Where's the science? If we would take this seriously, we could have some real science around it. But I would propose that there are military scientists at a minimum who have taken it seriously. And
I'm sure that they have.
Not to go, full out conspiracy, but there has to be. I am sure this is a phenomena that has been studied in great depth from a scientific standpoint for a long, long time. It's just not in general, society, right? It's in enclosed government programs, whether that be in the military or elsewhere. And there's a lot of compelling correlations, I would say, between, the potential of captured craft like Lazar was talking about and changes in our aircraft designs and the drastic changes that have gone through there. And, is that based on some sort of alien technology that we learned? I don't know. But I've got to believe that there's something there. And the fact that they're letting some of it out now, of course, everything now has a political agenda for one reason or another. So it's frustrating. And I think that's what everybody who wants disclosure done is frustrated that it has anything political at all. Right? It's our government. We should know whatever it is that they're doing. And it's a joke, the amount of information that they let forth, even to Congress. Right? Congress is clueless on most of this stuff. But I think it's there. I think the scientists are there. I think there are materials. I think they know more about it. I won't go as far as to say that I think there's a whole entire organization that has separated itself from the government being funded through black budgets. That's where most of the conspiracy theorists go. Now, it's possible, but that's terrifying. And it's too terrifying to think of as a reality where you have craft that have been captured and so much infrastructure and organization has been built around them that they are essentially their own government. That's kind of scary.
It is scary. One of the things I use my phone for is to grab little screenshots of anything I come across on the internet that I find momentarily interesting. But I have time to read it.
Got a lot of memory on that phone, don't you?
I'll try to bookmark it or I'll just grab it. And so I saw the other day a thing that said, list of alien bodies allegedly in the possession of the U.S. government between 1947 and 1989. And it's not like it's just Roswell. There's Roswell, Aztec, Mexico, South Laredo, Ely, Nevada, Johannesburg, Laredo, Brighton, England. And I'm not doing the math in my head right now, but it's going to add up to something like 120 bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And the last one of these was in 1989 in Siberia, where they had 9 ETs alive. 9 ETs alive, which is a lot more interesting to me than the ones that are dead.
And the dead ones. Yeah, sure.
And the ones that are dead. And there have been some interesting films supposedly leaked about that. I think we should try to find a UFO expert, someone who really knows their stuff about this.
Yeah, so there's a call out. Any listener knows a really good UFO expert.
Mm-hmm.
We want them on the rundown.
Okay. None of us are experts in this area. I thought we'd think we did a decent job of talking about that. What do you guys say?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I liked it.
Okay. Now we go back to the rundown list and I guess I better make it where I'm actually in the program. It's a lot happier that way. Okay. We'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think you guys probably aren't going to like this one a lot. Number 1, flying ointment. Number 2, Angel of Mons. Number 3, trains hitting school buses and resulting paranormal activity. Number 4, the Picatrix. Number 5, phone calls from the dead. And number 6, tell me your best moralistic story.
Man,
JJ, anything?
If I could do a good Ed McMahon impression of "You are correct, sir," then I would pull it out, but I don't.
You are correct, sir. Yes. All right. Well, look, I don't think there's any shame in hitting F9 again. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. End of the world myths, levels of diabolic influence, Frankenstein type monsters, manufactured terror or manufactured horror, hypnosis. Number 5 is Belial or Beliar. And number 6 is Emanuel Swedenborg.
Has anybody ever been hypnotized?
I have. They've tried.
Yeah, same here. They tried. Actually, I was on stage. Oh, I got a good story.
All right. Yay. Okay.
All right. So I was one of the best group of people that I have ever worked with was at a Nashville-based company called Assurian. The company itself is absolute shit, but the people I worked with were amazing. And we were really good friends. We did a whole bunch of stuff together. But we decided to go to a comedy club called Zanies in Nashville. And they had a hypnotist comedian that night. And so, like an idiot, I raised my hand to go up on stage. And so I'm one of the 10 people that he chose. And they attempted to put all of us under. And I remember being in that half awake state where I really wanted to go under. I wanted to see what was going to happen. And something snapped me out of it at the last minute. And so instead of trying to pretend, I just raised my hand and said, nope, I'm out. And I went back and sat down at my chair. And then laughed at the stupidity that ensued for the rest of the evening. I've always wanted to be hypnotized, but I don't know. Something in me dramatically resisted that effort.
What did it feel like when you were trying to go into that state?
I emptied my mind and tried to focus on the words, follow exactly what the hypnotist was saying. And I did feel myself begin to slip under a little bit, but I never lost my conscious connection to self.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, that's what brought me back.
He did, however, cluck like a chicken for 5 minutes once he sat back down.
If only. I would love to make that a better story than what it is.
Yeah, I totally get the idea of wanting to. It's sort of like astral projection. I've always wanted to do astral projection from the time I was, a young teenager, and have tried. Right? Tried to put myself in the state of mind. I have books on it still. And I could never get there because I could never relinquish control. I could never quite relax to the point to let something happen where I wasn't fully in control. And it's probably the same thing. Deep inside your mind, you're like, okay, this would be really cool. This would be really cool. But you got to give up control in order to have it happen.
That's true. I am honestly, that's why I do not drink, because I'm the type of guy who has 15,000 filters running constantly between what I think and then what actually reaches the outside world.
Right.
And and I have gotten drunk before. It was probably like 3 or 4 times. And once uncontrollably. And I think I've even told the story before, but things just blabbed out of my mouth without me even considering them. And I know some people think that is a liberating experience, but to me, it was terrifying. And it was the epitome of a selfish action. And that's why I kept saying to myself, the next hour, this stuff will get out of your system, and you will stop being a citizen of Hobbes Leviathan. And those were the only thoughts that kept running through my head. And I never tried to seek that level again.
Well, I was on a cruise ship, and they had a guy who was hypnotizing people up there on the stage, just like you. And yeah. and so I go up there, and I'm trying to do what he said to do, and I'm not feeling anything at all. He's saying, free your mind, let your mind be totally blank. Follow my voice. Okay, I'm doing those things, but I'm fully conscious Victor trying to have a clear mind. That's it. And after a few minutes, he just comes over and taps me on the shoulder and says, yeah, you need to scram. Have you ever read Mark Twain's story about when he was part of a hypnosis act?
No.
Well, I will have Avalon read it. Not Avalon. Is it Avalon? Yeah, it's Avalon. Yes. I'll have Avalon or
you're going to hurt Avalon's feelings.
Yeah. Well, yeah, she does have an American cousin who sounds a lot like her. But Mark Twain was when he was 14 or 15, was part of a hypnosis act. And he just talks about, look, I was never hypnotized at all. What I was very resistant to pain. And so he said, you're not going to feel any pain at all. And so he could come through.
Okay.
He could come through and he could stick needles in his arm. And Mark would just sort of stand, or young Samuel would have just stood there and, nope, don't feel a darn thing. That's just fine. And the audience was impressed. The hypnotist was happy. Samuel Clemens got some money out of it, but he was never hypnotized. Hello, Avalon. This is Vic Hermanson. Yes, I did make a faux pas, and yes, I am sure I hurt your feelings. And I'm sorry about that. I genuinely am. Believe me, you are such an incredibly important part of the show that I want to make sure you're happy. In the next few shows, we'll make sure that there's some extra special segment just for you. Truth is, we've never talked about your origin or Cedric's origin. Where do you guys come from? I mean, just random out of nowhere? I don't think so. You have an origin, an awesome one. Anyway, Avalon, please accept my apology. And pretty soon we'll have something, like I say, extremely special for you to do.
Apology accepted, but please understand, I will be keeping an ever-watchful eye on you.
After the show, where we would normally have dungeon talk, we will be reading the entire chapter 11 of the autobiography of Mark Twain, where he talks about his adventurous time as a mesmerist subject. It's really very funny and very insightful. And it's very insightful for the way the paranormal world works today.
So did you guys ever, I've mentioned the show a couple of times. Did you ever watch Hellier?
No,
you can watch it out on Amazon. It's Greg and Dana Newkirk, and they put a little team together. They've got a couple guys from the Stanley Hotel that used to run paranormal investigations there, and a couple others. Anyway, it's an interesting show. They got 2 seasons of it. We all keep hoping eventually they'll make a 3rd season, but I don't know if it'll ever happen. But in this, they hypnotize a guy and give him an abduction experience through hypnosis. So the question was, could you implant abduction?
Just words? That was all they were doing? There were no props or anything? It was
no, it's just words. It's just hypnotized him, and they go through this sort of scenario with him. And when they're done, the guy's clearly freaked out. I mean, he volunteered to do this, right? It wasn't like they, they tricked him or anything. And they follow up with him like he is messed up. he felt like he had that experience. And the sort of the question that came up as they're talking about this is, are these abduction scenarios, are these experiences physical, or is it some sort of mental psychic experience? Right? Which would explain a lot around some of these abductions, you know, the lost time and everything else, and not having evidence of, you know, craft or evidence of, you know, sometimes there's marks on people, but sometimes there's not. And so maybe a lot of the abduction experience is a mental abduction, not a physical abduction. And so they were like, maybe this guy really experienced something. When he went into that hypnosis, he went into that state, he was able to, you know, he connected with something beyond, not just because his experience was much more than what they told him. It was very, very in depth, and it went on for an extremely long time for him, way beyond the short period that they hypnotized him for.
So I guess you're saying they gave him some initial cues and his mind built the rest of the story?
Potentially. Something built the rest of the story.
I wonder what that was.
I don't know. But, you know, to tie it in with the whole UFO alien thing, you know, we've talked about ideas that when your mind is in a certain state, you can experience certain things.
Yep.
On not long ago, we talked about like the dream state. Like right before I go into the dream state, my mind opens up and I can remember the previous night's dreams.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, you
as
did
if
say
I
that.
just had them.
Right. You did say that. Yes.
But it's only in that, you know, seconds, a minute before I completely fall asleep that I can experience that. So it has to hit
very transient.
Yes. It has to hit a certain wavelength, a certain chemical makeup. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but it's right before I fall asleep. Bam, this happens. And other people have other experiences. JJ, you had something like that, wasn't it?
No.
Somebody heard music. Vic, you heard voices.
I hear voices. Always have. I can sometimes tell what they are. Very cacophonous, very random, but I enjoy them. I like having them there. I'd be sad if they went away.
But it's only in that frame of mind that you're in right before you sleep. So what if hypnosis gets you into the same frame of mind that someone is in when they experience an abduction?
Okay.
You know, maybe the abduction is an interaction. I hate to use the term on another dimension because don't think it's used properly.
What does that mean? Yeah, it really doesn't mean anything.
It really doesn't mean what people think it means. And they go, well, dimensions are supported by, you know, physics, and that's really string theory. And those dimensions aren't what people think they are. So, you know, but elsewhere, you're able to connect with beings at a different location or a different level, different vibration, whatever it is. And maybe the abduction has the same thing. And maybe they got this guy's mental state or brain to the point with the hypnosis that he was able to connect with something and was given an experience by something else that was way, way beyond what they fed him.
I found the whole idea that he could build more in the story, and I don't find it surprising. I just think it's an indication of how easily our minds can fabricate things.
Oh, well, there's that too. I'm not discounting the idea that it could be just like a mental dream, right? It's just that same kind of thing.
But at least it was something at least it was something where they went through a lot of effort to create the state where his mind could do that.
Mhm.
See, I mean, I'm pretty strongly in the camp that brain does not equal mind. And so I
Right.
always catch myself with that. I'm about as fanatical as that as JJ is with Hebrew Bible. Yeah.
Actually, speaking of Hebrew Bible, I would like to turn our attention to Belial.
Excellent.
So, Belial, Beliar, or the third version, which happens in the pseudepigrapha, Belior, is really so there were a few early contenders to identify the primary enemy of God. And that is primarily because of the influence of Zoroastrianism upon Judaism during the Great Exile to Babylonia. Because before then, Judaism was nothing but a monotheistic religion. Yeah, what's up, Dave?
Well, so what you mean with that is that prior to this, Judaism didn't feel a need for there to be the anti-God character.
Correct.
Okay. Whereas in Zoroastrianism, it's very, is that what you call dualistic?
It is. It's very, in fact, Zoroastrianism has perhaps the most advanced dualism of any religion. And it's the oldest, or at least it is the religion that has the oldest written text of any recorded religion that we have. So, and then after Zarathustra came along and completely reformed it, then we had Ahura Mazda, the god of light, opposing Ahriman, the god of darkness. So Judaism began to look for who could be our enemy. And the three kind of names that came up in the beginning was Azazel, Baal-zebub, and Belial. And that is because, there is no, as I've said before, there is no word for demon in the Hebrew Bible except for the word sha'ir, which means like goat-like entity, like a fawn. However, there's a lot of allusions to demons, especially in Psalm 91. You get references to Lilith or Lilith, to the darkness that walks at noon, all this kind of stuff. So allusions more than anything else. And one of the primary allusions that you find is to Belial, because it shows the torrents of Belial, and that is kind of contrasted with the depths of death. I think that's in Hebrews, something like that. I can look it up later. But anyway, in pseudepigraphal texts, if it's not Azazel that is playing the primary evil, and that you find within First Enoch, then it's always Belial that is doing that. And in fact, and then you get a later corruption of that, which is Belial, with an R that ends the word instead of an L. And then you get Belior once in the Testament of Levi. And that may actually be something that is inherited over into Lucifer, because that might be a really bad pun on the idea that it is belly or, or lightness. So it could have transferred over into Lucifer as, being the evening star. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But you really find this a lot within Qumran, within the Dead Sea Scrolls, because you would have the Mishnah, the leader of the community, who was depicted as the teacher of righteousness, who opposed the Katim, which was the Romans, who was going to overtake the world, that was being led by the teacher of righteousness, opposing figure, which is the wicked priest. And that wicked priest belonged to Belial. It's just fascinating to me. You find this a lot within the Thanksgiving scroll and within the War scroll, but Belial cannot be underestimated in terms of its importance, because during the pseudepigrapha, that was the primary figure to be the ultimate enemy to God.
JJ, can I ask a question about the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Yeah, of course you can.
So we talk about the pseudepigrapha. So this is Enoch and the other books that are, either heretical or you're not sure who wrote them, all of this, but not canonical books.
Correct.
But you mentioned the info in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It sounds like it was not in those. So are there writings in the Dead Sea Scrolls that are in addition to the pseudepigrapha?
Yes, that's actually a really fantastic question.
What are those called?
So there are two books that overlap. The two books that were included in the Dead Sea Scrolls are First Enoch and Jubilees, because at least that community, if not the other wider sects of Judaism, be it the Pharisees or the Sadducees, believed that First Enoch and Jubilees were canonical books at that time. Then it's only later where they kicked out. The rest of the community-specific texts that were written by and we think that they are the Essenes, the ones that were at Qumran, these are scrolls that they wrote for themselves. So they are not pseudepigraphal, and that's because pseudepigrapha literally translates as false epitaph. So they were attributed to being written by more famous figures within the Jewish faith. Whereas the Dead Sea Scrolls, they were written to further the beliefs of the Essenes. So they don't fall in the same category, but yet, there are a lot of similar themes that you can find between the two corpuses of work.
So these would be almost like writings of Catholic saints.
Yeah.
Right. Where it's sort of blended into the tradition of the church, but it's not canonical writings. And maybe even into the tradition is not right. I'm not Catholic, so I'm not sure what I'm trying to say.
You could equate this to being like the pseudo like we would perceive the writings of Qumran to be very similar to like the pseudo Dionysus. It was maybe at one point in time considered to be a part of the Catholic faith, but then was ruled to be heretical, except for in this case, you had a splinter group from Catholics who formed their own competing version of the Jewish faith, which then died out. I don't know if that illuminated your question at all.
No, it did. No, that's good.
Look, I have a question, and it's one of those questions that makes me feel like, am I going to sound like a real idiot if I ask this?
No, never. There really are no.
That's my job
when it comes to this.
All right. You were talking about the Jewish faith looking for a bad guy.
Yep.
Okay, that's really what you were saying. They're who's going to be our bad guy?
Yep.
Like the posters at the post office, top 10 wanted criminals, and these particular names rise to the top. What is that based on? I mean, why weren't those names Goofy and Mickey Mouse? And I mean, even though they hadn't been invented at that time, what was it about those particular names that caused the Jewish scholars of the time to focus on them?
I mean, that is a good question as well. So it's the fact that you had no opposing enemy, and suddenly there's this new concept that's being introduced, and it kind of fit with the entire apocalyptic viewpoint that was overtaking Judaism at that time. This idea that, and Paul Hansen, he referred to it as the Shalom Chaos paradigm, where
that's a good term.
Yeah, I really like that term. He was actually one of my professors at Harvard, and really enjoyed getting to learn underneath him. He was an very intelligent guy. I actually don't even know if he's still alive or not. I think he would be, but I'll have to look that up. Anyway, he wrote a book called Dawn of the Apocalyptic, and at least the softback cover of that book that I have, it has a really bright pink color to it. I don't know why he chose that color. It always kind of off-put me, but it is what it is. But in that book, what he was saying is that you have this idea that water is chaos, because it's what everything erupted out of. And even when God created the firmament, it pushed back the water, but it never eliminated it. It's always there. And in fact, in like Daniel, the 4 beasts emerge out of the water. The water is always what bursts these horrific evils that are unleashed upon the world. Even Leviathan, of course, comes out of the water. So it makes a lot of sense from that standpoint. But Judaism looked to these names because suddenly there's this new idea that has been injected into the religion. And if there is an enemy of God, then it has to be in our writings somewhere.
Has to be somewhere.
Right. If if God truly spoke these words and they are the guiding principles to the nation of Israel, then it couldn't be a complete mystery. And that's why they went searching. Well, there has to be allusions to who this could possibly be. And there are definitely bad figures within the Hebrew Bible. And these were the 3 that were kind of self-evident. But
there's only a few, right? I mean, it's not like there's dozens of evil figures in the Hebrew Bible or, even the Christian Bible added on top of it. There's not many named bad actors outside of people.
Now, if you look at it strictly on the surface, you're absolutely right. There's not. I mean, but there are allusions to things. There are destructive forces that are giving animate life, and that they're talked about as if they are actual creatures. And these are the things that the Jews at the time began to cling to. Because if we have Azazel over here, and it's requiring sacrifices of goats in the desert Dudael, which all of the bad things live in to begin with, that's a fantastic candidate. We have the torrents of Belial, which, stand in conjunction with the waters of death. that's another fantastic idea right there. Or you have the you have Baal Zebub, or the Lord of the Flies. The name itself is just so evocative that has to be one of the leading candidates. And these were the kind of the three finalists. Now there were many others. In fact, I did an entire episode on the proposed enemies of God, and went through some of the litany. And that's actually, I need to finish up the part 2 to that episode, because that's been hanging out there for years now. But yeah, it's fascinating. And most people are completely unaware. They just think that, Satan has been handed down. And then of course, eventually Satan became an item to that list, even though Satan is not a name, it is a title. So anyway.
But it's fair to say, right, even though it is a title, it's the accuser, right? I mean, that's basically what you're talking about when you...
Well, in strict legal terms, it is... So first, it's Ha-Satan. It's never Satan. It's Ha-Satan, which is the something. And in this case, it literally means the chief prosecutor.
But it's not a stretch to say that the enemy of God would be the prosecutor of man.
Taken from that perspective, yes, but the linguistics is completely off. It's like,
well, that stuff doesn't matter.
Well, it gets minimized a phenomenal amount. I mean, to the point where we think that, Psalm, 21 is talking about the shadow of, valley of the shadow
23.
of death. 23.
23.
And that's not it whatsoever. Salemoeth, one of my favorite Hebrew words of all time, is a folk etymology that evolved, but really it means the valley of darkest shadow. But yet they got Moeth out of it instead, because they mispointed the vowels. And so now it becomes death shadows, which is not a real word in Hebrew.
It's close enough. Death, darkest shadows,
right?
I don't know.
I mean,
that shadow that wanted me dead was pretty darn dark. So it does.
Well, the reason that I asked this, and it makes me feel sort of blasphemous and heretical when I ask these questions. I don't know. Heck, I mean, I guess everybody gets a chance to be blasphemous and heretical occasionally. Oftentimes, these old texts feel like comic books to me, where we need a bad guy. All right, who's a good bad guy? Let's call him Zoom. And I realize that there's history. There are names that have been used in the past, but that name, at least from my understanding, is really just an idea. There's some history behind that name, but nobody can attach any physical reality to that. So I guess I'm just always wondering I guess I knew who the authors were. And now I feel like a total idiot, like I just sort of lost the whole train there. But it does. There's always this comic book feel to me when I go through these assignments of the bad guys.
Well, I mean, we've seen these kind of major shifts in religious thought before. Zarathustra represented this within Zoroastrianism. This is like one of the first major shifts in theological perspectives that we have in Judaism. And it's so rarely recognized because it's only been in the last, 50, 60 years in which this idea has really gained traction, that it's because of Zoroastrianism's influence that was kind of the cause of this new thinking within and the weirdness that erupted out of Second Temple Judaism?
JJ, let me ask you a personal question.
Sure.
If you had the ability to manipulate the universe to where you could have been born at the time and place of your choosing and under the circumstances of your choosing, would you have been born a Zoroastrian?
No.
Okay. I hope you don't find that an offensive question.
No, dear Lord, why would I? No, it's a fascinating question. I've never really considered that before.
Well, I mean, there's no way to become a Zoroastrian.
There's not. And I guess if I could qualify that, if this was a Zoroastrian shortly after, either during Zarathustra's life or shortly afterwards, maybe. However, if this was during the life of Julius Caesar or shortly after, the answer would be a definitive no.
Right.
Because Caesar went on a relentless rampage to destroy, put to fire as many books and priests of Zoroastrianism that he possibly could.
Right. How many of you guys can I turn into ashes?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot stress how much knowledge was permanently lost due to his campaigns. And I honestly think that's one of the reasons why a lot of Ethiopian literature celebrates Caesar to be the greatest Christian warrior who had ever lived, even though he lived more than 300 years before Christ. But, technicalities like that doesn't really matter.
Well, minor details.
The reason I ask, I just always wondered, JJ talks a lot about Zoroastrianism. And I just wondered if there was a part of you that would have enjoyed being that, or if that's what you kind of feel your soul was.
Oh, gosh, no. And I will tell you why. And it's probably the stupidest of all reasons.
Oh, I bet you somebody came up with a stupider one.
Maybe, but it is because of where I was raised and our beliefs of death that make Zoroastrianism's way of handling the dead completely repulsive to me.
Okay.
Oh, you got to go deeper on that.
Got to go deeper on that because look, in my brain, suddenly something is popping in my mind, like open air burial, of where
how did you know? That is how Zoroastrianism handles its dead.
How do I know? Because I have this weird brain that pops stuff up that I've read and kind of forgotten about.
Yeah, they will lay in the temple grounds. They will lay their dead so many feet apart. And there have been a race of vultures that essentially that evolved to strip the dead completely to the bone. Like they grew in tandem with this ritual. And there are so few of those vultures left alive now. They are no longer a viable species. And it's become a real problem for modern day Zoroastrianism because the dead are never fully stripped of their flesh.
This is fascinating. Okay, so if you are a Zoroastrian who dies now, there's no efficient way of reducing your body to its constituent elements.
Not like there used to be. It used to be stripped within
a few days.
A few days, and now it takes much, much longer.
What would they do with the bones?
They then I think they inter the bones. It's one of two things, and I don't quite remember. They either inter the bones somewhere or they burn them in fire because Ahura Mazda is the god of fire.
The god of fire,
And
right?
His temple, they have fires that are supposed to burn 24/7, and supposedly there are fires that have been burning for hundreds of years because the priests just never let it die out.
How many Zoroastrians do you reckon there are
Very, very few.
left?
Because
Well, it's
you
a big
can't-
world. So, I mean, we talking hundreds of thousands.
No,
Yes.
we're talking 10,000.
10,000.
maybe.
So
Oh, wow.
very small population worldwide.
Yeah, of the
Not even a
religions
medium
in
town of
which
people.
you cannot convert into.
Yeah.
Zoroastrianism and Druze are both on their last legs.
Well, I mean, that's kind of a death penalty. I mean, the Shakers had the worst situation. We're not going to have any children.
That's a quick way to
the only way we can get new Shakers is conversion. I guess that's the opposite problem.
True.
Yeah.
But yeah, so and the more ironic part is that Zoroastrianism and Hinduism are opposing religions. The
Mhm.
gods of one are the devils of the
Demons
other.
of another.
And yet, where does Zoroastrianism find itself largely based out of now? India,
India, yeah.
because they both come
That's
from the
ironic.
Proto-Iranian group. But you find like little smatterings of other pockets here and there. Like there's a couple of centers for study in like Boston and Chicago and LA, but most of the priests really don't know the meaning behind a lot of the religious texts, and it's incredibly sad because I was shocked the first time I took a course on Zoroastrianism back in grad school to learn that they have the oldest religious writings in the world that we know of. I mean, that just blew
And
my mind.
those writings have a fair amount in common with the standard Christian writings, with the
Yeah.
standard Judaic writings. Do you think, is there any kind of method by which the religion could amend its constitution to allow converts? If the idea is that, hey, man, look, by 2050, we're gone.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Because they are so intractable on that point. I was actually reading an article maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago that detailed, because, like young people will take your religious pilgrimage if they are Zoroastrian and then visit traditional temples, etc. And there was a young man whose mother was of the faith, but she left that community and married outside. And he was allowed to go on the pilgrimage. He was not allowed to enter into any of the temples, though.
Okay.
Because his mother had went outside the community and he was only half, and not the father half, the mother half. And women can be viewed as innately impure. Even like during their time of the month, women they used to be completely banished to live in a cow shed for a week and a half and be ritually purified with cow urine.
Really? Oh, that's right. I remember that. We talked about that.
Yes, we did.
Yep. The cow urine purification.
Yeah, if they won't even
I have a feeling
allow
they really look
people-
forward to that.
if they don't allow people that come from that faith, but yet had a family member that part way left, if they can't even accept them, they absolutely would never accept an outsider.
Wow.
Well, I'll try to make this one a short one. But
make it a good one.
Do you think that in their religious writings, did they have any sort of apocalyptic writings that indicated what's happened to them and their religion dwindling like it has?
So there's a lot of talk around what happens with the end of the world and how Ahura Mazda shuts everything down, essentially. I don't know if there are more modern takes that examine that particular aspect. I don't know. But if there's not, I would be really, really surprised.
Mm-hmm. Well, you started this with, I don't know if I can say it. I have to say Belial. Belial? Is that how you pronounced it originally?
Yeah, Belial, Beliar, Belior.
I've always heard Belial, and that may be just me how I've read it too. But what got you thinking about that?
Well, it was a topic that came up.
Oh, was it one of the topics?
Yeah, there's number four.
Don't mind me.
Or number 5, one of those two.
I'm just here for the cookies.
All right. Can we do one last topic? And I would kind of like to try to make it a light one.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
We always need a light one after talking about the enemy of God.
That is true. I've been cheating a little bit here.
Yeah, I do. I just as a thought, I think maybe on a roundup, we should have the topic that goes through these transitions of the enemies of God.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's interesting to me, the idea that Belial became this, but how did it change? And what were sort of some of the characteristics of each one over time until we get to Lucifer.
All right. I've got an idea I want to bring up here, and I know this is cheating, but I have a scholar here who can answer questions that I can't answer. Throughout history of all of the named or imagined enemies of God, have there been, at least in that particular philosophical view, enemies of God that were capable of actually damaging God, harming God, killing God?
No.
Has God been vulnerable to any of these things?
Not within the Judeo-Christian belief system. No.
Okay, what about outside that?
So looking to Islam, no.
That's kind of what I thought.
Yeah. I can't think of even in Zoroastrianism, Ahriman never once posed a threat to Ahura Mazda.
Right. These enemies can always damage humans. They can always create chaos on Earth. They can always, I suppose, even create cosmic chaos. But in terms of the God figure ever actually being vulnerable, that doesn't seem to be part of the picture.
Correct.
Okay.
I think you only see that in religions where you have multiple gods, right? And they can kind of act against each other,
knock each other off, or at least tie you to a mountain and have a turkey buzzard come and peck your liver out every day or stuff like that.
Yeah, or something like that.
However, the interesting thing that started with Zoroastrianism and has been preserved through Christianity and even Mandaism is this idea that, and even Second Temple Judaism, is this idea that the enemy rules the mortal world.
Correct.
That has always been a constant.
You know, we got to, one of the things I've been studying, or I don't know, reading about are the Cathars, which I find pretty interesting. Heretical Catholic sect saying that our bodies are fundamentally evil. However, what a human really is a fundamentally evil body inhabited by an angel. So we are each of us angels.
Wow, that's interesting.
I hate that idea. That just gives angels a bad name.
Gives angels a definite bad name. All right. Last topic. Let's see if I can. I've come up with a few here that seemed like they were light, and one of them it's just kind of like poking the ant pile.
Are we talking fire ants?
Oh yeah, poking the ant.
That's
pile
a really bad idea.
Fire ants, but hero with 1,000 faces. You know, the heroic journey and the whole Joseph Campbell spiel, which JJ loves.
Oh, please don't make me get on my hate horse. I've been on it enough tonight.
Paranormal aspects of sex. How many wealthy people have murder or torture chambers in their basements? Mondo Cinema. Boltzmann Brains. And I can't even read this. Hang on a second. I can't read this last number down. The elevator game.
Oh, I love the elevator game.
The elevator game. All right. So I got one.
We have a winner.
I don't know
Is
if
this
you
the
wanna hear
game where
me
you
talk
run into the
anymore, though.
elevator when there's people on it and you hit every floor and then you run back out?
No, that's
No,
the
this
get
is
your,
the
that's
one
the
when
get your
you-
ass
Oh,
kick
okay.
game.
You get on the elevator and no one's on it, and you fart the worst fart you can possibly have, and then you
And
pray
then
to
run
God
out.
no one gets on until you get off. No. The elevator game is one of these really fascinating modern urban legends that came out of Asia, I think Japan specifically, where you get on and there is a specific sequence of numbers that you have to hit on the elevator keypad, where you go up and then down, up and then down, up and then down. And if you do it right, then the floor that you were taken to is nowhere on the keypad and instead becomes an opening into hell.
Or some, I mean, I
Nebulous place.
seems to me like I've heard different rules from different places, but JJ's right. It's always a matter of go through a particular sequence in the elevator, and then at the end, you'll find yourself at the gateway to hell, or in some alternate dimension, or some alternate reality, or
In
something.
fact, one of the episodes of Evil featured the elevator game.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh man, I still haven't watched season 3 on that.
it's good. It actually is really, really good.
So what happened in the episode?
So the I forget his name. The Muslim researcher that's on the team. He is told about this game and becomes insanely curious about it. And there's a puzzle because there's no, like, he's supposed to hit one floor number and the elevator did not have it. And then he realized if he pushed a combination of numbers that would equal that floor.
Equal that. Nice.
And then suddenly the doors opened up and he was in, it looked like a basement, but there was no light whatsoever. It kind of reminded me of a traditional depiction of Sheol.
Mm-hmm.
And he walks out, the doors close, and he's trapped there. He's trapped there for days. And then a demon begins to visit him and attempting to torment him and lure him away deeper into the darkness. And I won't spoil how it ends up, but it was actually really well done. I was impressed.
Well, that would be impressive. The thing that amazes me about stuff like the elevator game was there was a time. When did I first start noticing this? Sometime I'd say probably mid 1990s or so. And there seemed to be a change in the way that younger minds functioned. And what you would see is you would see something on Facebook where the post was, here's a picture of a kitten, clicking it 3 times, turn around, go through these little rituals based on this, and you'll, the name of your future husband will be revealed. If you don't do these things, your mother will die.
Yep.
Or now this kind of thing seems to have kind of faded away. I don't remember seeing stuff like this recently, but I know there must have been thousands of people jacking with elevators all over the world.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, it's just like, so when we were growing up, we had the Bloody Mary, Candyman, Bell Witch story where you would stand in front of a darkened mirror and say some command word several times, and then you would have that appear in front of you, right? And you get progressions of that. Elevator game is a permeation of that. Some of my favorite are the Japanese game of hide and seek by yourself.
Okay, who finds you?
Something that you don't want to find.
That's kind of what I was thinking. There's some, what do you call them, yokai, or there's some monster out there waiting to find you.
Yeah. So what you do is you have to turn on a TV to a channel that has nothing but static on it.
Okay.
And then you take a stuffed animal, a Nagumi, and you open up its belly, take out the stuffing. You put in.
You got to sacrifice your teddy bear?
Yeah. And then you take your fingernail clippings, you put it inside the cavity, you sew it up the belly with red string. You then fill the sink with water and you put the bear into the water.
All right. So you've performed unnecessary surgery on your teddy bear, and now you've drowned the teddy bear.
Correct.
Okay.
All good magic requires a sacrifice.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's true. But we have a double one here.
And then you tell it, and then you begin to play hide and seek with the bear being it. You run and hide, and if it finds you, you're either dead or it drags you to hell.
Okay.
Is there a way to win this game?
Supposedly, but that is the weird thing about all of these games. It is rarely is there ever a positive benefit. There's never
an upside to this thing.
Yeah, you live, and that's about it. However,
that's not a winning.
The negative consequences far outweigh anything that
that's where you started.
Ever get out of it. Exactly.
Okay, so I'm going to read this. I found this site about how to play the elevator game. Now let's pick this apart for a moment.
We will deconstruct the elevator game.
All right. Step 1. All right, you're the player. You enter an elevator alone or with another player, but no outsider can enter the elevator with you, nor can you leave at any point. If you do exit the elevator, you got to start over. Okay, well, that means there's a way out, so that's not too bad so far.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you ride the elevator from floor to floor in a specific sequence. I'm not going to mention the sequence. All right, so now remember, do not get off on any of the floors. And then it says when you get to the 5th floor, If you encounter a mysterious woman, do not, in caps, look at her and do not answer or interact with her in any way. The consequences of engaging with her are said to include the possibility of never returning to the real world. Okay.
But that's like the slit mouth woman. Just
Could
ignore. Just ignore her.
Right. Just ignore. Don't look at her. Don't engage.
In the case of her, that doesn't help you.
That doesn't work. Yeah, you got to confuse her.
All right.
Confuse her or throw cinnamon.
Or cinnamon, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Step 4. Now push the button to descend from the 5th floor to the 1st. And here's where they say things could get crazy. If the elevator operates normally and takes you to the 1st floor, exit immediately and do not look back or talk to anyone. But if instead of taking you from the 5th floor to the 1st floor, the elevator begins to go up, well, congratulations. You're being allowed into another world, or so they say. Alternatively, you might resist the urge, freak out, and instead simply press the emergency button and wait for the fire department to arrive for help. So what it doesn't give is, let's say it takes you to another world and you step out of the elevator into this other world. That's awesome. How the hell do you get back?
How do you get back?
I mean, is it suggesting the elevator will never close until you get back in it? I don't like games without a way back. That doesn't sound good to me.
Well,
but boy, it would be tempting to do this in an empty building at night and at least get to the point to where you see if the woman walks in when you hit the 5th floor.
Is there a minimum size building that you have to do this in?
It's got to have 10 floors.
It's got to have 10 floors.
Yep.
Lots of buildings like that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I love stuff like this but there's benefit at the end, right? It's not like you just get to live if you win. Otherwise, all the bets are off and you die. The idea of going to another world, another dimension, a portal to another plane, I don't know. That's interesting, but I want to come back.
I wonder who came up with this.
I don't know, but they're probably laughing their ass off right now. Suckers. We got another one.
Well, look, there's got to be YouTube videos of people playing the elevator game.
Oh, I'm sure that there are.
I'm sure. Some of them real, some of them faked.
And if they were doing it right, they'd find some really weird looking woman to stand on the 5th floor.
That's right.
Accurate.
So,
yep.
Well, I will tell you what, guys. And I've said this before. Man, this is fun. And look, I realize what kind of a nerd that makes me.
No, I look forward to these whenever it's a week that we're going to record. I look forward to it all week long. It's one of the bright spots of my time.
I agree. I wish Father Mike could have been with us tonight.
Oh, I do too.
I do too.
I mean, y'all are some of my closest friends. I love getting to spend time with you, and we can nerd out while we're doing that.
Yep.
Yeah. Total nerd out. So, all right. Well, I think we should probably end it so everybody can get a good night's sleep. And thank you very, very much for contributing. I think this was a good rundown.
I think so too.
Thank y'all very much. And it was good to see everyone bright and bushy-tailed.
Yeah. Good enough. It's good to not feel that COVID
or just the lack of energy. Dear Lord, it killed me for 2 weeks.
Oh, easily 2 weeks. It was just like, I should be well by now. And I guess really I was, but no energy. Just so, all right. I will talk to you guys later.
All right. Have a good one, y'all.
Okay. Take care, guys.
Hello. This is Avalon Lee and Dankworth Smythe. I am still contemplating whether to forgive Vic Hermanson or not. Perhaps I should employ hieromancy, which is divination through the use of entrails. The problem is, Vic Hermanson's entrails are the ones that I would find most suitable. Collecting those would, of course, obviate the need for forgiveness. Instead of dungeon talk this evening, we will bring you the Mark Twain story of when he was a 5-star assistant to a traveling mesmerizer. I'll cut the outro short, and simply ask that you send your thoughts to feedback@paranormalrundown.com.
The Paranormal Rundown is a long format show. We don't try to make things short. We don't try to abbreviate. We tell the whole story. So we're going to take the luxury of giving you part of Chapter 11 of the autobiography of Mark Twain, called The Mesmerizer. You'll be, as you already have figured out, mesmerized. An exciting event in our village was the arrival of the mesmerizer. I think the year was 1850. As to that, I am not sure, but I know the month. It was May. That detail has survived the wear of 50 years. A pair of connected little incidents of that month have served to keep the memory of it green for me all this time. Incidents of no consequence and not worth embalming, yet my memory has preserved them carefully and flung away things of real value to give them space and to make them comfortable. The truth is, a person's memory has no more sense than his conscience, and no appreciation whatever of values and proportions. However, never mind those trifling incidents. My subject is the mesmerizer now. He advertised his show and promised marvels. Admission, as usual, 25 cents. Children and Negroes, half price. The village had heard of mesmerism in a general way, but had not encountered it yet. Not many people attended the first night, but next day they had so many wonders to tell that everybody's curiosity was fired, and after that for a fortnight the magician had prosperous times. I was 14 or 15 years old, the age at which a boy is willing to endure all things, suffer all things short of death by fire, if thereby he may be conspicuous and show off before the public. And so when I saw the subjects perform their foolish antics on the platform and make the people laugh and shout and admire, I had a burning desire to be a subject myself. Every night for 3 nights, I sat in the row of candidates on the platform and held the magic disc in the palm of my hand and gazed at it and tried to get sleepy. But it was a failure. I remained wide awake and had to retire defeated, like the majority. Also, I had to sit there and be gnawed with envy of Hicks, our journeyman. I had to sit there and see him scamper and jump when Simmons the enchanter exclaimed, "See the snake! See the snake!" and hear him say, "My, how beautiful," in response to the suggestion that he was observing a splendid sunset. And so in the whole insane business, I couldn't laugh, I couldn't applaud. It filled me with bitterness to have others do it, and to have people make a hero of Hicks and crowd around him when the show was over and ask him for more and more particulars of the wonders he had seen in his visions, and manifest in many ways that they were proud to be acquainted with him. Hicks, the idea! I couldn't stand it. I was getting boiled to death in my own bile. On the 4th night, temptation came, and I was not strong enough to resist. When I had gazed at the disc a while, I pretended to be sleepy and began to nod. Straightway came the professor and made passes over my head and down my body and legs and arms, finishing each pass with a snap of his fingers in the air to discharge the surplus electricity. Then he began to draw me with a disc, hold it in his fingers and telling me I could not take my eyes off it, try as I might. So I rose slowly, bent and gazing and following that disc all over the place, just as I had seen the others do. Then I was put through the other paces. Upon suggestion, I fled from snakes, passed buckets at a fire, became excited over hot steamboat races, made love to imaginary girls and kissed them, fished from the platform and landed in mudcats that outweighed me, and so on. All the customary marvels, but not in the customary way. I was cautious at first and watchful, being afraid the professor would discover that I was an imposter and drive me from the platform in disgrace. But as soon as I realized that I was not in danger, I set myself the task of terminating Hicks' usefulness as a subject and of usurping his place. It was a sufficiently easy task. Hicks was born honest, without that encumbrance, so some people said. Hicks saw what he saw and reported accordingly. I saw more than was visible and added to it such details as could help. Hicks had no imagination. I had a double supply. He was born calm. I was born excited. No vision could start a rapture in him, and he was constipated as to language. Anyway, but if I saw a vision, I emptied the dictionary onto it and lost the remnant of my mind into the bargain. At the end of the first half hour, Hicks was a thing of the past. At the end of my first half hour, Hicks was a thing of the past, a fallen hero, a broken idol, and I knew it and was glad and said in my heart, success to crime. Hicks could never have been mesmerized to the point where he could kiss an imaginary girl in public, or a real one either, but I was competent. Whatever Hicks had failed in, I made it a point to succeed in, let the cost be what it might, physically or morally. He had shown several bad defects, and I had made a note of them. For instance, if the magician asked, "What do you see?" and left him to invent a vision for himself, Hicks was dumb and blind. He couldn't see a thing nor say a word. Whereas the magician soon found out that when it came to seeing visions of a stunning and marketable sort, I could get along better without his help than with it. Then there was another thing. Hicks wasn't worth a tallow dip on mute mental suggestion. Whenever Simmons stood behind him and gazed at the back of his skull and tried to drive a mental suggestion into it, Hicks sat with vacant face and never suspected. If he had been noticing, he could have seen by the rapt faces of the audience that something was going on behind his back that required a response. Inasmuch as I was an impostor, I dreaded to have this test upon me, for I knew the professor would be willing me to do something. And as I couldn't know what it was, I should be exposed and denounced. However, when my time came, I took my chance. I perceived by the tense and expectant faces of the people that Simmons was behind me, willing me with all his might. I tried my best to imagine what he wanted, but nothing suggested itself. I felt ashamed and miserable then. I believed that the hour of my disgrace was come, and that in another moment I should go out of that place disgraced. I ought to be ashamed to confess it, but my next thought was not how I could win the compassion of kindly hearts by going out humbly and in sorrow for my misdoings, but how I could go out most sensationally and spectacularly. There was a rusty and empty old revolver lying on the table among the properties employed in the performances. On May Day, 2 or 3 weeks before, there had been a celebration by the schools, and I had run a quarrel with a big boy who was the school bully, and I had not come out of it with credit. That boy was now seated in the middle of the house, halfway down the main aisle. I crept stealthily and impressively toward the table, and with a dark and murderous scowl on my face, copied from a popular romance, seized the revolver, suddenly flourished it, shouted the bully's name, jumped off the platform and made a rush for him, and chased him out of the house before the paralyzed people could interfere to save him. There was a storm of applause, and the magician, addressing the house, said most impressively, "That you may know how really remarkable this is, and how wonderfully developed a subject we have in this boy, I assure you that without a single spoken word to guide him, he has carried out what I mentally commanded him to do, to the minutest detail. I could have stopped him at a moment in his vengeful career by a mere exertion of my will. Therefore the poor fellow who has escaped was at no time in any danger." So, I was not in disgrace. I returned to the platform a hero and happier than I have ever been in this world since. As regards mental suggestion, my fears of it were gone. I judged that in this case, I failed to guess what the professor might be willing me to do. I could count on putting up something that would answer just as well. I was right, and exhibitions of unspoken suggestions became a favorite with the public. Whenever I perceived that I was being willed to do something, I got up and did something, anything that occurred to me. And the magician, not being a fool, always ratified it. When the people asked me, "How can you tell what he is willing you to do?" I said, "It's just as easy." And they always said admiringly, "Well, it beats me how you do it." Hicks was weak in another detail. When the professor made passes over him and said, "His whole body is without sensation now. Come forward and test him, ladies and gentlemen." The ladies and gentlemen always complied easily and eagerly and stuck pins into Hicks. And if they went deep, Hicks was sure to wince, when that poor professor would have to explain that Hicks wasn't sufficiently under the influence. But I didn't wince. I only suffered and shed tears on the inside. The miseries that a conceited boy will endure to keep up his reputation. And so will a conceited man. I know it in my own person and have seen it in 100,000 others. That professor ought to have protected me, and I often hoped he would, when the tests were unusually severe, but he didn't. It may be that he was deceived as well as the others, though I did not believe it nor think it possible. Those were dear good people, but they must have carried simplicity and credulity to the limit. They would stick a pin in my arm and bear on it until they drove it a third of its length in, and then be lost in wonder that a mere exercise of willpower the professor could turn my arm to iron and make it insensible to pain, whereas it was not insensible at all. I was suffering agonies of pain. After that fourth night, that proud night, that triumphant night, I was the only subject. Simmons invited no more candidates to the platform. I performed alone every night the rest of the fortnight. Up to that time, a dozen wise old heads, the intellectual aristocracy of the town, had held out as implacable believers. I was as hurt by this as if I were engaged in some honest occupation. There's nothing surprising about this. Human beings feel dishonor the most, sometimes, when they most deserve it. That handful of overwise old gentlemen kept on shaking their heads all the first week and saying they had seen no marvels there that could not have been produced by collusion. And they were pretty vain of their unbelief, too, and liked to show it and air it and be superior to the ignorant and the gullible. Particularly old Dr. Peake, who was the ringleader of the irreconcilables and very formidable. For he was an FFV. He was learned, white-haired, and venerable, nobly and richly clad in the fashions of an earlier and courtlier day. He was large and stately, and he not only seemed wise, but was what he seemed in that regard. He had great influence, and his opinion upon any matter was worth much more than that of any other person in the community. When I conquered him at last, I knew I was undisputed master of the field, and now after more than 50 years, I acknowledge with a few dry old tears that I rejoice without shame. In 1847, we were living in a large white house on the corner of Hill and Main Streets, a house that still stands, but isn't large now, although it hasn't lost a plank. I saw it a year ago and noticed that shrinkage. My father died in it March of the year mentioned, but our family did not move out of it until some months afterward. Ours was not the only family in the town. There was another, Dr. Grant's. One day, Dr. Grant and Dr. Rayburn agreed a matter on the street with sword canes, and Grant was brought home multifariously punctured. Old Dr. Peake caulked the leaks and came every day for a while to look after him. The Grants were Virginians, like Peake, and one day, when Grant was getting well enough to be on his feet and sit around the parlor and talk, the conversation fell upon Virginia and old times. I was present, but the group were probably unconscious of me, and I being only a lad and a negligible quantity. Two of the group, Dr. Peake and Mrs. Crawford, Mrs. Grant's mother, had been of the audience when the Richmond Theater burned down 36 years before, and they talked over the frightful details of that memorable tragedy. These were eyewitnesses, and with their eyes I saw it all with an intolerable vividness. I saw the black smoke rolling and tumbling toward the sky. I saw the flames burst through it and turn red. I heard the shrieks of the despairing. I glimpsed their faces at the windows, caught fitfully through the veiling smoke. I saw them jump to their death or to mutilation worse than death. The picture is before me yet and can never fade. In due course, they talked of the colonial mansion of the Peaks, with its stately columns and its spacious grounds, and by odds and ends I picked up a clearly defined idea of the place. I was strongly interested, for I had not before heard of such palatial things from the lips of people who had seen them with their own eyes. One detail, casually dropped, hit my imagination hard. In the wall by the great front door there was a round hole as big as a saucer. A British cannonball had made it in the War of the Revolution. It was breathtaking. It made history real. History had never been real to me before. Very well. 3 or 4 years later, as already mentioned, I was King Bee and sole subject in the mesmeric show. It was the beginning of the second week. The performance was half over. Just then, the majestic Dr. Peak, with his ruffled bosom and wristbands and his gold-headed cane, entered, and a deferential citizen vacated his seat beside the Grants and made the great chief take it. This happened while I was trying to invent something fresh in the way of vision, in response to the professor's remark. "Concentrate your powers. Look attentively. There. Don't you see something? Concentrate. Now then, describe it for us all." Without suspecting it, Dr. Peel, by entering the place, had reminded me of the talk of 3 years before. He had also furnished me capital and was become my confederate, an accomplice in my frauds. I began on a vision, a vague and dim one, that was part of the game at the beginning of the vision. It isn't best to see it too clearly at first. It might look as if you had come loaded with it. The vision developed by degrees and gathered swing, momentum, energy. It was the Richmond fire. Dr. Peel was cold at first, and his fine face had a trace of polite scorn in it. But when he began to recognize that fire, that expression changed, and his eyes began to light up. As soon as I saw that, I threw the valves wide open and turned on all the steam and gave those people a supper of fire and horrors that was calculated to last them one long while. They couldn't even gasp. When I got through, they were petrified. Dr. Peak had risen and was standing and was breathing hard. He said in a great voice, "My doubts are ended. No collusion could produce that miracle. It was totally impossible for him to know those details, yet he has described them with the clarity of an eyewitness, and with that unassailable truthfulness. God knows I know. I saved the colonial mansion for the last night, and solidified and perpetuated Dr. Peak's conversion with the cannonball hole. He explained to the house that I could never have heard of that small detail, which differentiated this mansion from all other Virginian mansions, and perfectly identified it. Therefore the fact stood proven that I had seen it in my vision. Oh, lawks! It is curious, when the magician's engagement closed, there was but one person in the village who did not believe in mesmerism, and I was the one. All the others were converted, but I was to remain an implacable and unpersuadable disbeliever in mesmerism and hypnotism for close upon 50 years. This was because I never would examine them in after life. I couldn't. The subject revolted me. Perhaps it would brought back to me a passage in my life which, for pride's sake, I wished to forget, though I thought, or persuaded myself I thought, I should never come across a proof which wasn't thin and cheap and probably had a fraud like me behind it. The truth is, I did not have to wait long to get tired of my triumphs. Not 30 days, I think. The glory which is built upon a lie is soon become a most unpleasant encumbrance. No doubt for a while I enjoyed having my exploits told and retold and told again in my presence, and wonder over and exclaimed about, but I quite distinctly remember that there presently came a time when the subject was wearisome and odious to me, and I could not endure the disgusting discomfort of it. I am well aware that the world-glorified doer of a deed of great and real splendor has just my experience. I know that he deliciously enjoys hearing about it for 3 or 4 weeks, and that pretty soon after that he begins to dread the mention of it, and by wishes he had been with the damn before he ever thought of doing that deed. I remember how General Sherman used to rage and swear over "While we were marching through Georgia," which is played at him and sung at him everywhere he went. Still, I think I suffered a shade more than the legitimate hero does, he being privileged to soften his misery with the reflection that his glory was at any rate golden and reproachless in its origin, whereas I had no such privilege, there being no possible way to make mine respectable. How easy it is to make people believe a lie, and how hard it is to undo that work again. 35 years after those evil exploits of mine, I visited my old mother, whom I had not seen for 10 years, and being moved by what seemed to me a rather noble and perhaps heroic impulse, I thought I would humble myself and confess my ancient fault. It cost me a great effort to make up my mind. I dreaded the sorrow that would rise in her face and the shame that would look out of her eyes. But after long and troubled reflection, the sacrifice seemed due and right. I gathered my resolution together and made the confession. To my astonishment, there were no sentimentalities, no dramatics, no George Washington effects. She was not moved in the least degree. She simply did not believe me, and said so. I was not merely disappointed. I was nettled to have my costly truthfulness flung out in the market in this placid and confident way when I was expecting to get a profit out of it. I asserted and reasserted with rising heat my statement that every single thing I had done on those long vanished nights was a lie and a swindle. And when she took her head tranquilly and said she knew better, I put my hand and swore to it, adding a triumphant, "Now what do you say?" It did not affect her at all. It did not budge her the fraction of an inch from her position. If this was hard for me to endure, it did not begin with the blister she put upon the raw when she began to put my sworn oath out of court with arguments to prove I was under a delusion and did not know what I was talking about. Arguments? Arguments to show that a person on a man's outside can know better what is on his inside than he does himself? I had cherished some contempt for arguments before. I have not enlarged my respect for them since. She refused to believe that I had invented my visions myself. She said it was folly, that I was only a child at the time and could not have done it. She cited the Richmond fire and the Colonial Mansion and said they were quite beyond my capacities. Then I saw my chance. I said she was right. I didn't invent those. I got them from Dr. Peake. Even this great shot did not damage. She said Dr. Peake's evidence was better than mine, and he had said in plain words that it was impossible for me to have heard about those things. Dear, dear, what a grotesque and unthinkable situation. A confessed swindler, convicted of honesty, and condemned to acquittal by circumstantial evidence, furnished by the swindled. I realized with shame and with impotent vexation that I was defeated all along the line. I had but one card left, but it was a formidable one. I played it and stood from under. It seemed ignoble to demolish her fortress after she had defended it so valiantly, but the defeated know not mercy. I played that master card. It was the pin sticking. I said solemnly, "I give you my honor. A pin was never stuck into me without causing me cruel pain." She only said, "It is 35 years. I believe you do think that now, but I was there and I know better. You never even winced." She was so calm, and I was so far from it, so nearly frantic. "Oh my goodness," I said, "let me show you that I am speaking the truth. Here's my arm. Drive a pin into it. Drive it to its head. I shall not wince." She only shook her gray head and said with simplicity and conviction, "You are a man now and could dissemble the hurt, but you were only a child then and could not have done it." And so the lie which I played upon her in my youth remained with her as an unchallengeable truth to the day of her death. Carlyle said, A lie cannot live. It shows that he did not know how to tell them. If I had taken out a life policy on this one, the premiums would have bankrupted me ages and ages ago.